Strap into your seats and get ready. It's time for the Mortarpod.
Hey everybody, Alex Stephenson and Jake Faas here. Welcome to this week's episode of the Mortarpod. Jake, how's it going?
I'm terrific. How are you doing?
I'm doing good too. We had a long day today. We printed the first prototype of the board game we've been working on for more than a year, so it was kind of a cool, exciting day. And they turned out pretty good. I thought they looked cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be nice to be able to record some videos for you guys in the next few months here, over the next few months here, and have you guys learn about the game and all of the stuff about it. Still got a little bit of a process before we're done with that, but it's just exciting to finally have this first printed copies of it with full art and all that. So look forward to stuff on Travelers of Storia over the next few weeks. The Mortarpod is also brought to you by SeemsGoodMagic.com. It's our website. We post draft videos, post our podcasts there. I have my blog, and it's all things magic. So I've been hitting the Vintage Masters fairly hard. A buddy of ours, I think in 25 drafts, has opened 4 pieces of power. I'm on my 7th or 8th draft, and I've yet to open any power, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not that easy to get it. I don't know how he's done that well with it.
I know, it's pretty awesome. So he's up a few hundred, and there's, I'm of the mindset, I'm speculating that the price is really going to spike once Vintage Masters goes off on Power 9. Like, I really think that the prices on Power 9 they could go up drastically, because they reached a point where they kind of bottomed out, where Moxes were down to like 70 something, which is really cheap, But then they spiked again, and Lotus was up like 50%, 75%. So the prices have just been drastically fluctuating. So it's a hard market to interpret. But Power 9, I mean, how could it not go for a bunch when Vintage Masters goes offline, I feel like those dual lands, when Masters Edition first came out, they were fairly cheap. I mean, they were still expensive, but they were cheap when Masters Edition came out, and then when Masters Edition stopped, being offered as a draft format, the prices on all of the dual lands like skyrocketed insanely. They went like over 100. So I don't know. I see something similar to that happening with Power 9. And actually, our buddy opened a foil Mox too. So he already sold it, but God knows what that would have sold for once Vintage Masters goes offline. Because I believe the odds were 1 in 53 rares are your chance of getting power. Or not rares, I guess. They're in their own slot. But you have it was a 1 in 53 chance of opening power in that slot. But imagine what the odds are for opening like foil.
Foil power then within that, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably twice as rare or something. 1 in 100 maybe, who knows. So that was crazy that he opened that. I don't think we've got anything else really to report. We're just going to jump into it today. We're going over a couple sets, so here it is.
Cyclical Evolution.
Cyclical Evolution, a segment of the show we've been doing for a few weeks now. We're systematically going through all the cool cycles of every format in Magic, or every block set of Magic. Last week we did Tempest for you, and there were actually quite a bit. This week we've got Stronghold and Exodus, which surprisingly only had a few cycles, not that much. And
it was actually kind of a nice relief.
Yeah. Well, what was kind of your reasoning, or why you speculated that there's not that many?
Oh, yeah. Well, in previous sets, they had a lot of color hose set, and it could be up 5 to 10 cards that were color hosers in each set, not just in each block. And in this one, it was 10 in the first set, and these were large sets still, so like 350 cards instead of what it's 250 now. So 10 cards in 350 isn't as bad, but the small sets were still like 180, so getting 5 or 10 cards in that is actually quite a large chunk
Yeah.
when you think of what it really needs as far as color hose, and especially considering you put a big color hose right in the first set. So anyway, they didn't do any color hosing in the second in last set in Stronghold or Exodus. So,
Okay.
there were 5 extra slots, we'll say, potentially for each of those that were just open to invent new things. So
Maybe we want to go over. I think last week we talked about Tempest Block and sort of the lore of it, but maybe we want to talk briefly the mechanics that are in Stronghold and Exodus.
well, they just kind of continued the trend. This wasn't really a time when they set gave new stuff out anymore. Now we're used to seeing a new ability each set, I guess. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Mm-hmm. A
So they
couple,
really just
usually.
yeah, and they really just expanded upon buyback and the slivers and lycids, or lycids. Those were their go-tos. I'm trying to think if there was another thing. I feel like there was. Buyback and something else must have been... Oh, shadow. So they had more shadow creatures.
Okay.
But they actually dwindled down in number quite a bit in the last 2 sets for shadow creatures. And black and blue ended up getting the majority of them in the final set. And then I think blue still got only 1 in the mid set, and black got actually the majority, or it might have just had the Dothy Trapper, and that was good enough to call it,
okay.
you know what I mean? But anyway, so yeah, the real thing that they kind of pushed actually was +1/+1 counters. So they set up the mechanics in the first set, and then they expanded on different abilities. So Stronghold goes with +1/+1 counters and runs with it, and then Exodus did choose and discard cards as part of its mechanic lineup too. So you won't see a lot of them in the cycles that we had, but there were a lot of cards in blue and black in particular that let you discard cards for some effect. We'll see a couple of them actually. And then they were in red too. So Seismic Assault, which is actually something that we all know was part of this kind of new way of using cards in your hand as a resource. And then we'll see some of the other ones, and I'll talk about them then too.
Okay. And one more thing to note, Exodus is the beginning of the set symbol indicating the rarity. So
Yeah.
it's going to be the first time that we finally see what we're used to today, where you've got the sort of black as common, silver as uncommon, gold as rare, and mythic eventually as orange or whatever the hell color mythic is, I guess.
Yep. And then they started doing the actual numbering of the set down at the bottom too in Exodus. So Stronghold doesn't have that.
So that was sort of a important, long-lasting change that they made.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's jump into the cycles. First, we've got slivers. All right, so we have acidic sliver, crystalline sliver, victual sliver. I've never heard that word. Hibernation sliver and spine sliver. So right off the bat, we can tell they're all 2 mana 2/2s, and they're all allied color 2 mana.
Yep. The best one, hands down, is crystalline. So I don't know how else you can say it, but Shroud is just such a strong ability when you're talking about giving it to a bunch of creatures that are already giving all of their friends abilities too, And then I think second place is Hibernation Sliver, because it is essentially the same thing. You can always save the essential slivers and start back over if you're not in white with Crystalline Sliver or whatever. So that was like WOG protection. Crystalline Sliver was like targeted removal protection.
Oh, that's cool, yeah. Maybe we should just briefly run through them. We've got the black-red one, acidic, lets you pay 2 and sack the sliver, and it deals 2 damage to a creature or player. That's pretty cool. Crystalline, the one Jake's talking about, is blue-white, and that one gives all your guys Shroud. Victual Sliver is the green-white, and that lets you pay 2 and sack Sliver and gain 4 life, which probably is pretty good against the burn decks. Hibernation The one Jake just mentioned, blue-black, pay 2 life, you can return the sliver to your hand. And then you have the spined sliver in red and green, which when a sliver's blocked, it gets +1/+1 for each creature blocking it. So better than Rampage.
Hmm. They fixed it.
Yeah, they finally did what
Yeah.
Rampage should have been in the first place.
Hmm.
Pretty cool cycle. These slivers actually seem pretty strong. I like all those abilities. None of them really seem terrible by any means.
Oh no, no. I think they're all good in their own way. I just definitely think the blue ones here got like kind of outshine
Yeah,
still,
the other
you know.
ones, that's true.
And I think the reason is the other ones seem kind of justified in their effects, or like you're getting an effect that's worth the cost and what you're investing into it. Crystalline and Hibernation seem so far above what you're, a 2/2 that just never dies, or like a 2/2 that nothing I control now can be targeted. They're both really, I don't know. They're very, very mean to play against, I
Yeah,
guess.
I'm sure they seem like they needed a little more play testing because those
Yeah.
are really annoying. Uh, that's a cool cycle though, and
Hmm.
something we noticed when we were going through and picking up all these cycles was that Stronghold and Exodus actually had some pretty strong cards in them in
Hmm.
terms of the other sets that we've already reviewed for cycles. This seems like, despite not having the color hate sort of cycles, the just some pretty powerful cards. Buyback was a
Hmm.
very, I mean, we talked about that briefly, that it seems like an overpowered mechanic now, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I'd say it definitely is something that they're much more careful with now in having printed it, seen what they did, and having seen what they've done with it in
Hmm.
Time Spiral.
Like capsize was such a
Yeah,
annoying thing.
Capsize is like over the top when you think that they also put Sapphire Medallion out and Memory Crystal and just all these effects that were like make it less, make it less, make it less, and then Capsize for 2 mana, and
Yeah,
buy it back.
that's harsh.
Yeah, and it's very, very harsh because it all it takes is 2 medallions and a memory crystal, this is just whatever. 2 Helm of Awakenings and a memory crystal, 2 memory crystals and a medallion. Like it didn't matter what you had, but eventually you would just stop your opponent from doing stuff.
Hmm.
So.
And buyback just rewards you so much in limited for
Mhm.
flooding too, because
Mhm.
it's not like it's just the buyback is progressively getting stronger
Mhm.
as the later you're going in the game.
Yeah, and Capsize in particular is one of those really mean ones that's like eventually
Yeah,
once I can start stopping you at 6 mana, but then I can also really like grind you back at 12.
yeah,
And like if I
way too
wanted to
much.
commit really hard to that strategy at 6 mana, I could just start bouncing your stuff and just
Hmm.
never stop doing it.
Yeah,
So yeah,
against control or anything like that, it's probably
yeah,
devastating.
I think in the end it just proved that they were a little too generous with the first iteration of it, and maybe more of the spells should have had X in them, and they should have been variable depending on what they were targeting,
Mm.
or something like that. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Okay, moving on. We've got Mox Diamond. So this is singular cycle in its own set, but
Hmm.
it finally connects the Alpha Moxen.
Well,
And
it doesn't it doesn't really connect them, but it's definitely connected to it in spirit for sure. I
yeah, I
guess.
mean, you're right. They're different. It's
Hmm.
completely different. Mox Diamond is still played though, I believe, right? Mox Diamond's still a
I
popular
think
card
so.
in
Yeah.
Legacy.
Yeah, the only issue is that it requires land, and Legacy is already a land light format. So, I think Mox Diamond though it was just a really cool thing. But then I think what really put it over the edge was Tolarian Academy, where you could ditch extra copies of Tolarian Academy, because this was a time when I don't think when you played an extra copy of something like a legendary land, you didn't get it. It just went to the graveyard before it came out.
Hmm,
So
I
like
see.
now you can actually be like, I'll tap my thing for tons of mana, then I'll just ditch it for this new one and tap that one for tons of mana. But at the time, yeah, ditching your extra copies of Tolarian Academy just to juice the one that's already out is pretty good.
So yeah, like you said, not as good as the old Moxen for sure, but something you didn't notice before that you notice now is that Dan Fraser also did Mox Diamond,
Hmm.
which is kind of
Hmm.
cool.
And he did a really great job on it, I think.
Yeah.
And I really am comparing that to the alpha art on these other Moxen, which are good in their own way, but this one's just so much more detailed, and I like the facets on the
The
diamond. It
actual
looks,
diamond, me too.
yeah,
It
it
looks very
looks
good.
really great.
So yes, he did a good job on that.
So yay, Dan.
All right, next we've got a wall cycle. So we've got Wall of Blossoms, Wall of Razors, Wall of Tears, Wall of Souls, and Wall of Essence. Now, Wall of Blossoms is green, lets you draw a card when it comes out. Wall of Razors is red, it has first strike and it's a 4/1. Wall of Tears is blue, and when it blocks creatures, it bounces them to the owner's hand at end of combat. And that's a lingering trigger, right? So if Wall of Tears were to die
Yeah.
after it blocked, despite it being on the battlefield or not, that
hmm
lingering trigger would still.
Yeah, and you can block it and bounce it if you wanted to. Like, if
Mhm.
you wanted to play it with Peel from Reality, it could actually be a really mean card.
We've also got Wall of Souls in black. This one is when it's dealt combat damage, it deals an equal amount to target opponent, which, even though there are a couple cards, it seems like from Stronghold and Exodus that have that ability.
hmm
And then we've got Wall of Essence in white. And for each one combat damage dealt to it, you gain a life, which is kind
hmm
of cool.
I like this one always, Wall of Essence. But Wall of Blossoms was easily the best, I think. And it was quickly identified as like tournament worthy.
And then Wall of Blossoms eventually turned into Wall of Omens
hmm
as almost like a functional reprint, just in white instead of
hmm
green.
I
And
like it way more in green, and just because I don't think white deserves the card draw as much as green does.
I mean, Cobblade was slamming Wall of Omens, weren't they?
Yeah, yeah. And Wall of Omens, I'm glad that they want to see how they can make white draw cards, but I don't think it's right. I just don't think it fits. It doesn't feel right whenever they do it. It just, like Survival Cache, it seemed like so much work to do it. And Wall of Blossoms seemed too good,
That is interesting that
Or
both.
Wall of Omens,
That
excuse
is
me.
Yeah, that is interesting that both Wall of Omens and Survival Cache came from Rise of the Eldrazi, and it was
Well,
both.
they specifically were saying, we wanted to see what we could do with white card draw.
Hmm,
And so, like we just decided to do this where we
yeah.
put Wall of Blossoms back as Wall of Omens. And then this was our other solution, like let's make it dependent on some other thing
Yeah.
and make it more like a tax almost. Like where if your opponent is below you, then you actually are getting more from it.
hmm
So I don't know.
I think the issue was White already has answers for pretty much everything. So
hmm
the one thing that they really needed to hold back on for White is
hmm
a way to get extra value,
Yeah, they
card
need to
advantage.
let somebody else help White do that and not let White do it by itself. And
hmm
I think that's what they've kind of come to terms with. So
Yeah, I mean, blue. How long has blue-white control been an archetype?
it's actually, I think, one of the foundation archetypes of
Absolutely.
the game. I think the first deck was called the deck, and it was blue-white control, right? Like
I
they
don't know.
ran.
I'm not
I
sure.
think it was two Sarah Angels, and then everything was counterspells, swords to plowshares, moat, and other obnoxious stuff. But yeah.
It just, like we said, white doesn't need card draw because they're already so good, and that's
hmm
why they play blue to get the card draw. It's like the
hmm
blue is the counter in the card draw, and the white is answer everything.
Yeah. Is if it's on the board, I'll white it out, and if it if it
And
hasn't happened yet, I'll blue it.
if it's a planeswalker, I'll O-ring it.
hmm
It's just answers for everything. Maybe lands. Maybe lands are the one thing. But then you've got
And
blue. You
it
got blue
had
bounce.
Armageddon
So,
initially too.
oh, I guess that's true. So they really did have an answer for everything.
hmm
Okay, next we've got the Lycids. So we saw the Lycids in Tempest, and now we see them returning in Stronghold and Exodus. And this is sort of our connection from Stronghold to Exodus. So the Stronghold Lycids are Calming Lycid in white, Convulsing Lycid in red, Corrupting Lycid in black, and Tempting Lycid in green, and then we've got Gliding Lycid in blue. So these are all 3 mana Lycids that are 2/2s. They're all uncommons, is that right?
Yeah, the Stronghold cycle is all uncommon.
Okay, so the white Lycid makes it so the creature can't attack. The red listed makes it so a creature can't block. The black listed gives it fear. The tempting listed gives it lure. And the blue listed gives it flying. So kind of a cool cycle. We've got a little mix of both positive and negative listed effects, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I always thought tempting was actually the most unique of this cycle as far as its possibilities, you know? Because it really is kind of like a only or like your opponent's creatures can't block, and I don't know. It's so cool because it's a lure that moves around, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always gonna get through with the rest of your army, you know. So if you have a big team and a tempting listed, it just takes a couple turns, and I feel like your opponent is gonna die, you know.
Yeah, you just put it on your puniest creature or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can get in with all your big dudes. Or if you've got an opportunity to basically board wipe them, you just put it on your big dude. And
Yeah.
so I really like that. That's a great listed.
Mm-hmm.
We've also got dominating listed and transmogrifying listed, and these are from Exodus. And these are a little bit different, I guess. The dominating listed is rare. It's blue, and it lets you gain control of an enchanted creature. So definite strength in that. It costs you.
Yeah, this one. Yeah,
It's
sorry.
like a cheaper than control magic. It costs
Mm-hmm.
3 to untap it, and the initial 3. But the fact that you can constantly be taking their most powerful creature, that is
Yeah.
very strong.
This one's a great commander card,
Oh, I
and
bet. Yeah.
people underestimate it actually, and like the things you can do with. I'll attach it to this guy. You target it with a removal spell. Well, I'll attach it. Now it's an aura, and I'll counter your removal spell.
Yep.
Or you attack it. Attach. Sorry. Target it with a disenchant. Well, I'll make it a creature again. This
You're
thing
right.
is so annoying.
So it avoids specific removal.
Yeah.
It's beautiful for just snatching commanders. It's like
Yeah,
I'll take that commander. I'll take this one.
And a lot of times the way to deal with the control magic effect is just to take out the creature it's attached to anyway, you know? So in that instance, you dropping your dominating listed off and having the effect sit there waiting to happen again, you know? This one is just by far like the best one ever that they've ever made.
That is cool. I mean, let's see the transmogrifying one is unique because it's an artifact listed, which is just very strange in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And the first text on it is that it counts as a listed. Now I guess it would just say artifact creature listed.
Mm-hmm.
But the artifact one gives a creature +1/+1 and turns it into an artifact. And this is a shout out to transmogrifying. What's the name of that? It was transmogrifying.
Ashnod's Transmigrant.
Okay, so they brought back the word, and it's almost identical to the transmogrant. The difference is you have to sack the transmogrant to give the bonus, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this one is movable. So I would say this one's probably better, but I guess they're different enough where it's hard to say because transmogrant was also cheaper.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, this is a creature by itself, and so it does avoid the creature removal by becoming the enchantment as well. And there is just something about having a blocker that can always block too. You know, as long as he's untapped, you can always just attach it to the creature that you blocked with it, you know, and then
give the
unattach
bonus.
it.
Yep. I just like the idea. We talked about this with Tempest, but they sort of made the mistake of how they designed the listed ability, unfortunately, because
Yeah.
it's just too good. It's block
Yeah.
and then block. Yeah, it's gonna die. I'll just move it here. You know. So too much protection for itself.
The fall off
unfortunately.
ability should probably also be a tap ability, in all honesty. You know,
Yeah.
it should just be an aura that has a tap ability.
Yeah. It feels like they just didn't play test it enough to really see that it was designed correctly, I think.
I think a lot of times too, when it's like your kid, when you're designing it and then having designed a couple sets or whatever, you know, you don't look at it like people are going to play it not fair, you know, like you expect people to play nice with it, but it's not
You have
That's
to
not
look.
how it happens.
You have to look for the broken things, and
Yeah,
unfortunately, they just overlooked this one.
hmm
I think you and I talked about there wasn't like the rules weren't different enough, right? Where this everything still worked with illicits even at that
hmm
time with the
hmm
rules of Magic, right?
Yeah.
It was still abusable even during that time period.
Yeah, and it wasn't like I don't think at this time damage was on the stack because that happened with the 6th edition rules update, which would have happened right after this,
Okay.
which made Mog Fanatic so much better,
Mm-hmm.
I think, than when it was out initially. Um, yeah, because this would have been with 5th edition, and then after this, that's when 6th edition came out, and that's what made Mog Fanatic so good.
Well, these would have even been better with damage on the stack. It's
Yeah,
damage
and
on the
these got
stack and then move
incredibly
it.
good with that,
Yeah.
but they were still not like worthy of tournaments, you know.
I see.
But
Okay.
I mean, maybe with the exclusion of dominating
Yeah.
out of the board, but you know, they're all still really they would have been during that era of damage on the stack. They would have been very very good.
Yeah, definitely even better.
hmm
Okay. Next we've got Constant Miss from Stronghold teamed up with Flowstone Flood, Forbid, Slaughter, and Pegasus Stampede. So Constant Miss was from Stronghold. It was green. It was an instant for 2 mana with buyback, sack a land, and it was a fog. Then we've got Flowstone Flood in red, which is a 4 mana sorcery. Buyback, pay 3 life, and discard a card at random to destroy a land. Forbid, 3 mana, interrupt with buyback, choose and discard 2 cards, and you get to counter a spell. Slaughter in black, buyback for pay 4 life, and you get to destroy a non-black creature, and it can't be regenerated. And then we have Pegasus Stampede in white for 2 mana sorcery, and buybacks with a sack a land, and you get a token as a 1/1 white flyer. So just a buyback cycle for each color. We've
And
got
these are just a unique take on buyback where you aren't paying mana for it.
the white one actually seems like the standout one because we've got green, which has fog. That makes
hmm
sense. Red, which has stone rain, makes sense. Blue, counterspell, still makes sense. Slaughter, we've got dark banishing, makes
hmm
perfect sense. But then we've got Pegasus Stampede, which is put a white token out. Wouldn't you
Yeah.
have expected a gain life or something like that?
Well, they did gain life also, actually. But it's not uncommon. It's
I
a
see.
common, and it was white, 1 white, instant, sack a land, buyback.
Okay.
So you could convert. It was like Zeron Orb. You could convert any number of planes for sure into two life, or you could also convert your other lands. You know, just as long as you were tapping white mana first.
Maybe protection would have been okay.
I think protection would have been good. It might have been too good even.
They just
Depending.
needed they I mean the beauty of buyback is they could have just made it more difficult
They
to
actually could have made it sack a creature to buy it back, which would have been
yeah.
a different take on a lot of these other ones, you know, because Flowstone Flood actually is Forbid and Slaughter like mashup on their buyback,
Hmm.
and Constant Miss and Pegasus Stampede share the same buyback, but nobody used creatures as a resource,
I see.
which is funny. Because I would feel like that would maybe be a black or it would totally be available to white in my opinion, but not on this card in particular.
But I just thought that was interesting because it does seem like the rest of the cycle makes flavorful sense within its
hmm
color, but it's not that it's unheard of for white to create tokens because it's certainly not. But it's just not as it's not as straightforward within
Yeah,
the color as the other abilities were.
yeah, and actually protection was probably not right either because they had Flickering Ward actually in
Already at
Tempest.
the time.
Yeah,
Okay.
so they had the recursive protection, um, and when I think about it, it's actually a little difficult to come up with a basic white effect. That's not something that you would just put on a common card necessarily, you know.
Hmm.
Like
That's true.
Forbid feels right as an uncommon because it can't has buyback. And Flowstone Flood feels right as uncommon because it has buyback. You know, like all of
Hmm.
these feel right because they have buyback. And Pegasus Stampede actually feels like it could have been a common even with buyback because the cost is so debilitating, you know,
Hmm.
and you're really not getting a huge effect. It takes one Pyroclasm and you're back to square one.
I mean, yeah, and 6 mana, 3 lands only nets you three
Three
1/1
creatures,
flyers.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's really, I mean, and I guess you would get to keep your Pegasus Stampede, so you could cast it again. But it is very harsh. Sacking a land is harsh. Slaughter seems a little harsh too, because you have to be in a
Yeah.
good position to buy it back. But it still makes. I think it's still
Yeah.
pretty good.
But the other thing about Slaughter is if they've got a giant green creature that's like got regen, or if it's 4 power or more, I can justify paying 4 life to kill it.
And I had mentioned to you how Carnicid seemed really
Yeah.
good during this
Yeah,
time.
for sure.
So this is a great answer for it.
hmm
Okay, cool. Next we've got Allay and Shattering Pulse. So these are a white and red instant buyback cards, respectively. Allay is white, it destroys an enchantment with buyback 3, and then Shattering Pulse is red, it destroys an artifact with buyback 3. So definitely a cool cycle, very historic. Same exact idea remains today. This is one of those lingering color pie sort of ability things where you've got white being capable of taking out enchantments, and red being able to take out artifacts.
Yeah, this was a good point in Magic history where they were really, really pinning down the identities of the colors too, and actually reinforcing them through the cycles instead of confusing us even more.
Not much to say about it. Pretty basic. Next we have kind of an interesting cycle. So from Exodus we have Anarchist in red, Cartographer in green, Treasure Hunter in white, and Scrivener in blue. And then this connects to Gravedigger from Tempest. So this is a cycle of a mix of common and uncommons that come in and then return something from your graveyard to your hand. So the red one is a sorcery, the blue one is an instant, and let me also add Scrivener is in Vintage Masters. Treasure Hunter returns an artifact, Cartographer returns a land, and then Gravedigger, of course, returns a creature. So this was a cool cycle. Gravedigger has always been a great limited card. I love how it goes infinite with itself in multiples, which is always cool. Scrivener has proven to be very good in. I've played it multiple times now in Vintage Masters. That card holds up very well. I love it in the. I've been really addicted to the red-blue strategy, so it's nice, alongside Kindle, Solar Blast, any of those sort of just red burn spells. But it also works really well with the cycle spells because we've got Lightning Rift and Astral Slide in Vintage Masters.
Yeah, actually with Astral Slide, isn't it like a very, very brutal
It gives
beating?
you card, yes, it's direct card advantage because you can cycle your instant to Astral Slide, blink your Scrivener, which will come back and then bring back your instant card.
Has there been a 3-color one that you've seen in draft yet? Where they've done red for the Solar Blast cycling?
I haven't.
Or what? Okay.
I've done Lightning Rift and I've done Astral Slide with Scrivener, and both are great. I very much like that. I've been just talking up the mono blue pretty much in Vintage Masters. It's just a great deck. Blue, they really gave blue a lot of good commons and uncommons that tend to go fairly late. Like 8th to 10th pick. You can see, Ophidians, Choking Tethers goes late. Then you're picking up your Scriveners to bring back your Choking Tethers to tap down their army to get in with your Ophidians. You've got Mana Wars, which are just coming all over the place. You've got straight up Counterspell at common. They really, in my opinion, they gave blue a lot of tools to work with within its own color and very easy rarities. Ophidian just plays fantastic.
I know. I've gotten beaten by it several times.
The mono blue and the mono red seem like very solid strategies. You've got the mono red goblins, of course, but it really does seem like the other colors can't really go off easily in mono black. There is the mono black aggro deck with Carnophages and Putrid Imps and some other just cheap 1-drops. Dark Ritual them out.
I think Sarcomancy is in the set too.
Yes, absolutely. And then you've got the Spinal Graft as your cheap aura that just buffs the crap out of your 1-drop.
That one is crazy.
Swing for 5 on turn 2 with your Carnophagia or Sarcomancy. So mono black is also a possibility. I definitely wouldn't be sold on mono green, but that being said, there is Provoke, so they at least have some form of removal in there. I'm not really sold on it because they've more set green up to be alongside blue or black because of the madness with Arrogant Worm and Basking Root Walla and stuff like that. So Treasure Hunter's cool. I like that. Getting the artifact card back. I like
I
it.
like him too. He was
Anar-
like kind of a interesting one. I guess maybe skewed a little different from what people would have expected. Because I
yeah.
think the Auramancer, which comes out eventually, might have been the initial, but it might have been because Monk Idealist is in the next set, and that does return an enchantment to your
Enchantments.
hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was telling you, Anarchist was a card I played infinite combo with,
Hmm.
Sunken Hope and Time Stretch. So that was back in the casual days, but that was a fun deck to play when you got it
Yeah.
off. And then I won with Phantom Warrior because he was unblockable. So it was a janky deck, but it did get there occasionally. Um, okay, so next we've got the Keeper cycle. Okay, so we've got Keeper of the Beasts in green, Keeper of the Dead in black, Keeper of the Flame in red, Keeper of the Mind in blue, and Keeper of the Light in white. So this was a cycle that it was dependent. They all have activated abilities, and they're dependent on your opponent controlling more than you or having something more than you. So
Mhm.
for Keeper of the Beasts, you get a 2/2 beast creature, but your opponent has to have more creatures than you. So the black one destroys a creature, a non-black creature, but they have to have more creatures or fewer creature cards in their graveyard than you. And then you've got red, which deals 2 to an opponent, but they have to have more life than you. The blue one, Mind, you can draw a card, but they have to have 2 more cards in hand than you. And then the Keeper of the Light, where you get to gain 3 life, but they have to have less. You have to have less life than target opponent. So,
Mhm.
do you have like sort of a ranking for these?
Um, I do think that like Keeper of the Flame and Keeper of the Beasts are actually the ones that I rank lowest. And it's not because I don't like Keeper of the Beast. I really do. I wish that the ability was easier to get going, but the fact that like once you have the same number of them or more, you're done getting more kind of sucks.
Yeah,
Keeper of the Flame is also shitty because generally if you're mono red or some red variant, you have more life than them in in most cases. And then it's also not even able to attack in. If this one had been a 2/1 and if Keeper of the Beast had been 2/1, I think I would have liked this cycle a little more
I
if they
see
had
that.
kind of
Yeah,
done a little bit more of a variance on it.
they're all 1/2s. We should
Yeah.
mention.
Yeah, sorry. They're all 1/2 for 2 mana of one color.
Yep.
And then they have a 1 mana activated ability of that color.
It is a
So
very interesting cycle though because
it's
it's theoretically powerful effects,
mhm.
but it really goes to show you how often do you really get to use them.
Mhm.
It's hard to look at them on the surface and know
Yeah.
exactly how often you're gonna get to use them.
I do think Keeper of the Dead actually like could have been very playable. I don't necessarily think it's number one though. I think Keeper of Mind is number one because discarding cards is on your own is really easy. In addition to that, you have cards like Boomerang and Capsize where you can literally ditch them to up their cost or their cards in hand.
Yeah,
So you
you're getting
can
it
literally
in
trigger
one
it if
card.
you're
Yeah.
if you're at the same mana or at the same card hand size.
Mm-hmm.
And then Keeper of Dead, there were a lot of black cards that had sack effects on them. Blood Pet was in this block, Blood Pet, Thrall, Surgeon, and Morgue Thrall, which was sack to mill yourself 3 cards, would have all been playable and limited next to Keeper of the Dead. So I think Keeper of the Dead, and this would have been definitely if you were drafting it the way we draft today, where you start with the last set, would have been a first pick for me.
Also, can't I mean, you just said one way to play Keeper of the Dead for value, but can't you also theoretically get rid of creature cards in your opponent's graveyard?
Yeah. In this block, I don't think they have anything to exile stuff from their graveyard though. So you
I
might
see.
be not able to do it within the block. But yeah, you're right. Let's say maybe in Commander, because I actually have played some of these in Commander, Keeper of the Dead and Keeper of the Mind in Commander, and they're fine in Commander
Yeah.
if Keeper of the Dead in particular can really work for you. Because you can totally be the self-mill person who doesn't care about their graveyard being huge.
Okay. Cool cycle. Next we have an Oath cycle. So we've got Oath of Druids in green, Oath of Ghouls in black, Oath of Lieges in white, Oath of Scholars in blue, and Oath of Mages in red. So these are all during each player's upkeep enchantment cards. Oath of Druids, if during each player's upkeep, if they control fewer creatures, they can reveal cards from their library until they reveal a creature card, and then put that creature into play, and all the other revealed cards into the graveyard. I believe that was Legacy played, or maybe still Legacy played.
Yeah, it's actually Legacy banned right now, I think.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then we've got Oath of Ghouls in black. Each player's upkeep, there's more creature cards in that player's graveyard than in a target opponent's graveyard. You can return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Oath of Lieges in white. During each upkeep, if the player controls fewer lands than target opponent, they can search up their library for a basic land card, put it into play. Then we've got Scholars in blue. Each player's upkeep, if they have fewer cards in hand than an opponent, they can draw. They may discard as their hand and draw 3 cards. And then we've got Oath of Mages in red. Each player's upkeep, if they have less life than target opponent, they can have Oath of Mages deal 1 damage to that opponent. So Oath of Mages seems like a less powerful Curse of the Pierced Heart.
Yeah.
And then
that's an understatement.
At rare as well.
Yeah.
So Oath of Druids, I'm assuming because it's banned, it's the most powerful one?
Yeah, I think hands down it is the most powerful because it basically says in Legacy
it's like polymorph
in particular,
almost.
It's free Emrakul. All I need is to play a Forbidding Orchard to give you a creature, basically. So let's see, are there any other really... No, I mean, free Emrakul is probably the most busted thing you can do with it.
Yeah.
And a 2-mana free Emrakul, or even less if you have Mox Diamond, and you can get it off turn 1 or turn 2 during your upkeep. It's
definitely
just too powerful.
Just an interesting rare cycle. And like we said, Oath of Mages should be definitely better than it is at rare. It should have been 2 damage or something.
I almost feel like it should have been a lightning bolt. Nobody should have been able to compare their life total to you. You know, like I feel like Oath of Mages has a lot of
downsides.
Yeah, and actually, I think what the problem with it really is that they went with this effect where it was damage. You know, it should have been something else. I don't know what exactly.
Maybe not block, creature not block, or something like that.
Yeah, like if they control more creatures than you, choose a creature for each creature they control more than you, and those creatures can't block this turn.
Creatures
you know what I mean?
Or creatures without flying maybe can't block this turn or something like that. So you're just sort of bashing away on each other.
Yeah. I don't think that it could have been Oath of Warlords too, you know, in that case, where really it's more about getting into combat. I think this one was just this is phoned in. Oath of Mages is phoned in.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Weird Harvest. Weird Harvest. All right, so this is the segment of the show where we talk about a weird card from the past. Specifically, the name and picture of the card are what we're talking about, not necessarily the actual cards mechanically or anything like that. Okay, so this week we've kind of gotten into this trend of plucking cards from the sets that we are doing cyclical evolution on. So this week we've got Jackalope Herd. Very, very cool picture that's nostalgic for Jake and I because we're almost 30 years old. And jackalopes were commonly seen at like bars and grills in the late 80s, early 90s. But if you don't know what a jackalope is, it was a sort of mythical creature. And what they would do in a bar is they would have a stuffed rabbit and they would just put a pair of deer antlers on it.
Yeah.
So I love that
they would. I think that they would usually take the head and mount it too. I don't.
Oh no, you're right. You're right because it would just be easier. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was even funnier because it was like this animal that you would never mount the head of with its head mounted on a wall, you know, plus having deer antlers attached to it.
So Jackalope Herd is from Exodus. It's a 4-mana 4/5. It's actually common. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
It's surprising. Yeah. And it's a beast. And if you play any spell, you have to bounce it to your hand. So it's like Urnham Djinn, except instead of giving Force Walk, if you play any spell, you have to bounce it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's actually a pretty powerful card. I don't think that's that bad.
No, I think it's a legit common. Still totally could make that and put it in a set today.
I'll give you the honors of reading the flavor text.
Oh, No, please, you. Because
Okay.
I've read it plenty of times.
There's little more demeaning than getting your butt kicked by a bunch of bunnies. I
I
love
think it's the first time they use butt in
I love
in the flavor text.
the alliteration too, butt bunch of bunnies. It's
Yeah.
very cool. I love it. Very funny flavor text, very funny
Mhm.
picture. You've got these sort of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed rabbits running around. I love that they have their ears in addition to the antlers too,
Mhm.
which is just so comically weird
Right.
looking.
Yeah.
Um, did the jackalopes have that in the bars too? Did they have their
Yeah.
normal
Yeah.
ears and the?
Mhm.
So it's just a play on. They. I should mention they do look really buff. They don't look like normal bunnies. They have the bunny heads in this, but their bodies are super buff looking,
Yeah.
which probably
They look
explains
like
why
they
they're
could also be
beasts.
large, yeah, instead of rabbit size. The problem is there's nothing in the picture to give them perspective other than like a few small cacti,
Yeah, which is
you know.
odd enough because it's in like cactus. You expect to see cactus in desert, but in this case, it
Yeah.
looks like they're in like a plains or
Yeah.
something like that.
Which is my other beef with the card because it's not really a green card with the creature type that it is,
Yeah,
you
it should
know.
have been white based on the
Hmm.
picture and stuff like that and the creature type. That's true. But Jackalope Herd, I recommend looking it up if you're just an audio listener because it's a funny picture on that card. But cutting it short a little bit this week, only because there's not a ton in Stronghold and Exodus. But hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in knowing what the background picture is, it is Flusterstorm. So Jake picked that one out. I thought it was a pretty cool looking picture too. We're going to be back next weekend. Actually, we're going to be pre-recording our next podcast. It's going to be it's still going to be out the same day, but we're going to be recording it a little bit early just because Jake's going to be out of town. So, um, hope you enjoyed it this week. What do we got? What do we got for the next
It'll be
podcast?
Urza Saga. Or no, wait. Aren't we going to be doing a lot of, well, probably not a lot of previews, but there'll be some previews, and then we'll also do Urza's Saga, most likely as a cyclical evolution.
Okay, yeah. If we have time, we're gonna do the cyclical evolution. Otherwise, we'll see how long it takes, I guess, to
Yeah.
get
They'll
through all these
probably only have
spoilers.
like 8 to 10 preview cards, by that time.
Okay.
So we'll see.
All right. Well, tune in next week. We'll see you later, guys.
Bye.